I'm joined today by the fabulous Valerie Stevenson, an experienced executive coach, people consultant, and well-being expert. And today's topic of conversation is coaching around mental health. Valerie spent most of her corporate career working with Deloitte on global projects where innovation and thought leadership were vital. Her final role with Deloitte was as Director of Engagement, responsible for well-being, engagement, and inclusion. Valerie, quite rightly, is proud to have been part of the team that set up an award-winning diversity network and several initiatives such as Mental Health Champions Programme, Transitions Coaching for Parents, and a Health and Wellbeing Programme, the most innovative at that time. Along with being a professional coach, Valerie is also an accredited supervisor. So in this podcast, I hope to explore with her the important topic from a supervisory perspective as well. So welcome, Valerie.
Thank you, Trayton. I'm very happy to be here, and this is a very important topic to me. So I'm happy to share my experiences and knowledge.
And I'm really looking forward to exploring it. You know, you and I have known each other for a while now, and I know this is not only something you're very knowledgeable about, but also something you're very passionate about. And in your own words, I know that you want to be known for your belief in coaching people from all walks of life. And that also includes coaching alongside those with mental ill health as well. So what I'd love to do is really start off by clarifying what you mean by mental health and whether this differs from well-being, which is another term that we might find that we use within coaching.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of turn that question on its head, because to start with, what do I mean when I talk about well-being? And I think well-being is the holistic topic, if you like. It covers all different areas. And if we think about those two words, hyphenated or not, well-being, we are being all the time. And it's whether we are well or not. So, that term well-being to me encapsulates our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health. And actually, for many, it would include our spiritual health as well. So for me, well-being is the holistic term that can be broken down into different components. I mean, mental health is obviously the health of the mind. I do sometimes think what gets a little bit confusing is when people talk about mental health. Well, actually, they mean mental ill health, because of course we all have mental health just as much as we all have physical health. But it's the way, the way we approach our thinking. And we know that there are times when our brain thinks in different ways. That is not mental ill health. That's more around neurodiversity, which perhaps we'll talk a little bit about later. But mental ill health, there are certain symptoms and conditions, and that's what that is for me. And obviously there are different, sometimes for some people it's very transitory. Life's ups and downs will cause us to be in different places along that mental health spectrum. And for some people it's a permanent condition that they would live with. I hope that's answered your question.
It's answered it beautifully, as I would expect you to do. And I love that term that everyone's a being, because we are, as you say, we're all human beings trying to be and be as healthy as we can, whether that's physical, mental, spiritual or otherwise. So that's a really nice definition and explanation for me. And that's helped me. And I hope our listeners really understand the differences there. One of the things that I'm sure the coaches that are listening to this podcast will want to understand, and I know it's something that you like to lean into and not shy away from, is when we go through coach training, we're sort of told to stay away from those mental health issues. So one of the things that I want to understand, and there's another sort of lovely phrase that you gave me, which was that it's about fundamentally that mental health is not an area to shy away from, but to lean into. So not only from your coaching perspective, but also, if I may tap into the supervisory element, is how do you set the right boundaries and know when to not move into that space? So I guess, how do you embrace it rather than shy away from it and have the right impact for the coachee that you're working with who may have mental health issues?
Yeah, and I think you've used a really important word there, which is boundaries. And I think, we all need to understand our boundaries. And I think that's very, coaches listening to this podcast will understand that, that is part of our training, to understand our boundaries. But I think anybody needs to understand what their boundaries are, whether you're a line manager or you're working in human resources. So we all have to understand what our personal boundaries are when perhaps working with clients who have a mental ill health condition. And perhaps individuals may feel that they are not the right resource or not equipped to work with people in this space. But one thought I would offer up is, given that 1 in 4 people, and I'm sure that ratio has probably got higher over the last 3-4 years, will encounter a mental ill health episode in their lives. It's highly likely that as a coach, you have coached somebody with a mental ill health condition, and maybe they've just not told you, or maybe you will in the future. And I'm always a great believer that you should be prepared. So, find out what your boundaries are. And if you are willing to step into this space, then, do something about it, get some learning around it. But, since starting my own business, some 10 years ago, I have often been challenged about working with people who have experienced mental health. For me, I feel I would do more harm turning away from someone, increasing the stigma that perhaps they've already felt. And I wouldn't have a coaching session with someone who was in the middle of a period of, say, clinical depression, because they wouldn't have the mental capacity to make sense of what we're doing. I might put coaching on hold, but I would be available to listen. Someone once asked me, would I coach an alcoholic? And I said, yes, as long as they weren't drunk. And I think this is an interesting sort of analogy that, it's the same. I mean, an alcoholic will have periods of absolutely, being coachable, but not when they're under the influence of alcohol. It's the same with mental health or physical health, to come to that. So I believe that, if we're talking about ethics, it is about knowing your boundaries and what you're comfortable with. And and that's fine. Some people will make the decision this is not a space for them. But, I would say, don't go out there to sort of analyze. Don't go out there to try and, say, oh, that person's got this person's got that. You do need to be able to spot signs and symptoms. But for, one of the boundaries is certainly, don't put yourself in the place of a medical practitioner.
I use a very simple sort of guideline. Don't sort of diagnose or treat. Yes. Which a medical practitioner is there to do, because as coaches, unless you're specifically trained in that space, that's not our role.
Definitely. I totally agree. And if you don't feel equipped to, continue down the route of coaching, and somebody is coming almost crying out for help in a way, then do find the right pathway for them, or resource for, the individual. I mean, don't just leave them standing alone. I mean, that probably is the worst thing you can do. And if you do want to work with people in this space, then, do go and gain some knowledge and develop the right mindset. Whether you've experienced mental health or not, never seek to judge, always seek to understand. You mentioned the supervisory piece, and, sort of qualified last year as a coaching supervisor, and it's something I've been wanting to do for some time. And actually, one of the reasons that drove me to do that was that there were so few supervisors, and maybe that position has changed over the years, who really understood. Certainly for me, I mean, I've been lucky to work with an amazing supervisor over the last 5 years who completely gets this space. But, supervisors who, again, going back to that initial training of, well, coaches just don't work with people who are mentally unwell. And of course, when you just come out of training, that's good advice, because like anything, when we specialise, we need to gain some additional knowledge. So I'm absolutely not saying that the training is wrong. It's just like when you start to gain experience, you will certainly put out where you want to go, what specialisms you might want to coaching.
Yeah, we make the assumption that, or that we've been informed that our coachee has a mental ill health issue. My experience is when working with coaches is that it just appears. And
Definitely.
you start to see some of those symptoms and you start to have some concerns that they may not be in their best place. So I think that's important to, as coaches, to realize that a lot of coaches won't disclose to you. Some do. And I find, it's a privilege for someone to say, I've got this issue, you just need to be aware of that. And I take that into consideration. And as I say, I don't go and try and diagnose and treat it, but I'm then aware of that's in, if you like, the system that I'm working with this individual.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think as coaches, we're not concerned, or we shouldn't be concerned, particularly in this space, about what is wrong. It's more about answering the question, well, what to do.
Mm.
And certainly it is useful to have some tools to help the client consider their own well-being, and in particular if we're doing with mental well-being as well. But, it's so often people don't declare that there is an issue, or it isn't part of the goals that we're dealing with, perhaps when we have a three-way conversation with the client and the person supporting the coaching. It does come up. I think more often lately people will recognise that there is a coaching goal there to do with the individual's well-being, but very often it will come up through coaching. And then we have to use our judgment as to sort of, well, where do we go from here? Do we need to recontract? Is it something that we can just continue with? It's a point of awareness rather than anything we have to do. And I think one of the things that always occurs to me is that as coaches, we have such a strong skill set that encourages people to open up. So we know that when we go in as coaches, we have to build good relationships with people. We also hone and develop our listening skills. And there you go. We've got that perfect set of why people would want to open up to us as a coach, when perhaps they wouldn't feel happy to do that to their line manager, they may, or somebody in an HR role, perhaps for fear that they may be misunderstood if they do so.
Absolutely. It's great to hear you say that, because a great coach will build a relationship where it will put the coach in a place where they're comfortable to disclose and, express their emotions and their thinking and other things that they may give to us, which is, part of a great coaching relationship, and building that and helping to raise awareness for both parties to help that individual to grow. There are a number of things, Valerie, that you mentioned that I want to come back to, which are really important, is contracting with the coachee. And when I contract, I always make it clear about the boundaries of coaching and what the aim of the coaching is. And what sometimes happens there is that I get disclosure from the individual that they then talk into, that they've got a mental ill health issue, or as you said, there's some neurodivergent element that I need to be aware of. And what's your experience of that contracting and, I guess, setting up that relationship to start with, to get it onto a good footing and good start?
Yeah, I mean, I almost want to go back to my Deloitte days. Actually, I spent most of my sort of corporate working career rather, working in professional services. And certainly I would say that's probably where my interest in well-being actually sprung from. But it was part of my job, my role, but also it quickly sort of came into my coaching. And there would be times when it would be declared upfront as part of a coaching goal. I mean, it may have been perhaps a momentary lapse into mental health following a relationship breakdown at work or at home. More likely, actually, it was a perceived failure to achieve a career goal that would actually just send somebody spiraling out of control. Or it could be the demands of the job just exceeded their own personal resources. And those were sometimes the occasions when it just came up. It was recognised by perhaps the partner who was, responsible for the individual who they reported to. But there clearly were occasions when it came up other during the coaching. And I would always ask myself the question, and again, I think this is the question you ask when you're a coach or a line manager: is there anything anybody else needs to know? And if there wasn't, well, then, things would continue, because it was just almost like a special experience that the individual had shared to me. And if it didn't make any difference to the coaching, but it was just, that relational presence that we create during coaching, then it would sit with me and we would be aware of it and we would talk about it, but it didn't alter the contract we had. There may have been occasions, and there still are, where something's come up that's quite a major issue, and with the individual's agreement, then perhaps we would have a further three-way meeting to discuss it. I mean, clearly my boundaries as a coach and my boundaries of confidentiality are very dear to me and very strong with me, and I would not disclose anything the client told me, unless, of course, those things that we always tell clients up front about, are they going to cause harm to themselves or others, as long with the sort of unlawful activities. I mean, those would be the only times when I feel there wouldn't be a need to break confidentiality.
Yeah. And the other two, if I may just add, that I sort of put into my contracting around that and disclosing, is whether it's illegal or whether it breaches organisational policy. Yeah. And I love your question, is there anything that others need to know? Yeah. So you're putting the responsibility back onto the coachee to then, say, yes, there is, and then take ownership of that. The other question also, Valerie, that I use sometimes right at the beginning of the contract: is there anything else I need to know? Yeah. It then gives them the opportunity to share, because, going back to the beginning of the conversation, we shouldn't shy away from it, and we shouldn't make it a sort of stigma. I think if that's something, a challenge that they've got, it's important for me as the coach to be aware of that, and with that trust, and as you say, that confidentiality, it stays within that relationship, but it allows me then to work with the whole person and the whole system and challenges that they're working with. So those are some of the questions that I use, and some great ones, as you say, from yourself there.
Yes, that question, is there anything I need to know, is something that I really came home to me actually during my supervision studies. And it's a question that, it came out of, you should start your supervision sessions with this, but I've brought it into my coaching now as well, because I think we're all in a different place, anytime during the day, actually. And it's important for me as a coach or as a supervisor to know where the person I'm coaching or supervising is at that given moment. I don't know what they've gone through, prior to stepping into the coaching space. I don't know what's happened, the day before, the week before. And, they may have, gone through something quite traumatic that would be useful for me to know, because the way they are might be different, and that would explain it.
Yeah, perfect. And sort of the way we're talking at the moment is that our client will, to some degree, disclose that and give us an understanding of it. Sometimes they won't. Where that situation is where they don't give that, and as a coach we're listening and we're noticing what's going on, what are some of the things that coaches should be recognizing to maybe give an indication that something isn't quite right from a mental health perspective?
Yes, I think there is this sort of phrase that comes to mind, when I think about sort of coaching in this space, or, as a line manager, actually, we can only deal with what we know. But there are sometimes situations where we're aware of something that's changed about our client or the person that we're managing. And, from a line manager point of view, you're going to be observing, that person much more frequently, which can be helpful. But actually also from a coach point of view, sometimes having that gap between how frequently you see your clients can also give you some indications that something's changed. I do think we need to be aware of the signs and symptoms of mental ill health conditions. And I'm going to do a shout out here for mental health first aid training, because I think that is essential actually for all coaches and for line managers. It's a life skill for me. I don't think it's just a nice to have. I think we we all should be aware of, much more aware of mental health as well as physical health as well. We wouldn't ignore somebody whose arm was clearly broken and dangling off the end, just as much as we shouldn't ignore somebody who's looking so different, is having difficulty in putting a sentence together, is losing attention very quickly, physically just looks different. And we can state that back to the individual. You could say, just as much as you would to this is about one human being, using that word again, to another. I'm recognizing that you're losing focus today. Is there anything you want to tell me? And 9 times out of 10, Trace, and I don't know about you, but that will trigger that response in the individual. This is somebody who I can, who's interested in me, who I could talk to. And that's not prying, it's just stating what you're observing. So, yeah, I think it's knowing, having that confidence to know, what we're talking about when we mean mental health, and being confident to reach out to people, to offer them and to listen. I mean, if we don't do anything else as coaches, we can listen.
Yeah. And there's some lovely points, and I'd just like to unpick some of this, if I may. I think this point about, I use the term noticing, I'm noticing this, because when we work with a client, we're on a journey with them, and that journey is the journey of development and awakening and, helping them to play their best game, whatever game they choose to play. So you do notice there's changes going on, and that's our role as coach, help them change to be better, whatever better is for them. But we always assume as a coach that it's going to be a positive better and that journey is going to be seamless with no ups and downs. But you're absolutely right. What I notice with my clients is sometimes there'll be a step back rather than a step forward, or there'll be an emotional change and they're behaving differently than normal, because I can pick up on that because I've built that relationship, whether that's over 3, 6 or plus months time. So I think that's a really important point. And I love your phrase around, with the time. And again, this comes back to the importance of, when you have a coaching relationship, that the timings of the session are appropriate to the individual and sort of the context in what they're working with. I know some coaches will try and speed or accelerate sessions through, but what you don't then get is understand what the normal is for them, because you're just working within a short space. So the timings of those sessions and understanding and noticing the relationship. But the other key piece, which I want to reinforce for our listeners, whether you, absolutely, as you say, whether you're a coach or a line manager or just a general individual, is get some mental health first aid training, because it's critical to be able to recognise it. And then obviously the other key part that as coaches we're trained to do, and line managers should be trained, is signpost people to the right professional support that they need at that point of need. So I think there's some great points that you raise in there, Valerie, and thank you for that.
Yeah, and just one thing that you triggered something when you were talking as well, is I think as coaches, we can't always expect that we're going to be tripping along in the green grasses with our clients and everything's fine and happy. We have to be prepared, and a book comes to mind here by the wonderful Hetty Einzig, The Future of Coaching. And in this book, she talks about, as coaches, we need to be prepared to step into the dark places with our clients. It's not that we're going to stay there. We know all about, sometimes these things can transfer to ourselves, and we have to be prepared that that isn't happening. And we talk to our supervisor if we've been through or share, one of our clients has shared a traumatic experience, but we have to be prepared to go to those places with our clients.
Absolutely. And I use the term, we need to go to places where we're both vulnerable.
Yes, absolutely. Great word.
And it's building the relationship to go into those spaces. And for me, that's where I call it the magic. That's where a real awareness starts to develop, and where the richness can then help them to move out of that space into an even better space.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that term. And I've not heard of that book, so we'll put that in the show notes that people can refer that. And certainly after this, I'll look up on Google and get that. So we talked about a lot of things, Val, around noticing and some of the sort of things that we might recognize and some of the challenges that mental ill health and sort of some of the well-being elements provide. But if I may, I'd like to move into some of the skills or the tools or the key principles that you've learned that have worked to help people move out of that space and to manage those, reduce those issues so that they can play their best game. So would you mind talking to some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would just say that I think, if you have found yourself coaching in this space, or you're thinking about moving into, being a well-being coach, is certainly a good first step is that mental health first aid training. So, just bear that in mind. And for those of you who are already mental health first aid trainers, don't forget that you do need to sort of do your top-up training. I think it's every couple of years. It's just something I had to remind myself of recently, so I thought I'd do a shout out for that. But there are, there are many things that you can do. I mean, for me, I've been such an avid reader over the years. I mean, I think my interest in I'm going to use the term well-being because I think that's where it started, was one that was just really about myself and as life progressed, those around me. So I've always had this sort of, strong interest in things that, nourished my mind, body and soul, if you like. And, it's taken me in many interesting directions over the years. I mean, I became a vegetarian at age 11, much to my mother's consternation because she didn't know what to feed me. And then, got into practicing meditation and yoga. And I've just always been naturally curious about what makes human beings. It's just a natural curiosity. But I think, the journey into that well-being space really started for me when I was working in that, pressurized professional services environment, which was no different from any other similar organisation. But I felt that was giving me the opportunity to do something positive. And I consider myself have been very lucky. So I've had the opportunity to work with some great people in this space, and they've willingly shared their knowledge. And I'm gonna just shout out a few names here because they've just been so important to me. Dr. Jill McLeod, who gave me the inspiration to open up access to wellbeing in the workplace, and who taught me about neurodiversity when the term, wasn't understood. People would say to me, what are you talking about? And then people like John Binns, who came about his experience of depression when he was a partner at Deloitte. And, I haven't had a period of depression, so I don't know what it's like. I can only understand it from what others have told me. But if you're in the same space as me, then, get this book by, I don't know Chaiton if you know him, but Matthew Johnston. He's the author and illustrator of I Had a Black Dog. And it's the most amazing book. It's the illustrations and what he says, who really puts you into that place of somebody who perhaps has depression.
I've not read the book, but there's a great video on YouTube called Black Dog.
Yeah.
And I'll disclose here, I have had a bout of depression, and it is a very, use the word, dark place to be. And my own experience of it as being very numb and no emotions, but not being in a great place. And I think the video, if people haven't experienced depression, to understand what people are going through, that video and the book, I'm sure, reinforces it, is a great asset to look at. And I'd recommend any coach or even any individual to go and look at that to understand depression and the impact that it has on individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you know, there's wonderful people out there and, you know, organizations to go to. And the one that I worked very closely with was SANE, SANE, who of course runs the Black Dog campaign. So while I was at Deloitte, I persuaded the partners there to buy a black dog, and we decorated it, and it was in the sort of reception area for many years, and it was a great talking point. You know, it got people talking about mental ill health. Another great learning opportunity, which is so easily accessible, is an organisation called Action for Happiness that I've, you know, followed and done some volunteering work for over the years. You know, Mark Williams, one of the co-founders, great guy. But, you know, you just go on their website. They've got some fantastic resources, and they have these regular webinars. You can take a course. I mean, it is just about living a happier life. But they also have these amazing speakers from topics, you know, on positive psychology, mindfulness, healthy eating, exercise, you name it, it's there. And all the resources are there for anybody. You know, you don't have to pay a fee. You can just go and get that information. So that's Action for Happiness is a great resource.
And if I can just build on that, Val, as well, Mind has a great website and some brilliant free resources as well on a number of issues. So that's great. Yeah.
So those are some of the really, you know, you can first aid training, all of that. And then there's other stuff that you can do. If you really want to be serious about that, then there are certainly some training courses that you can go on. As I say, I've always been an avid reader. I'll come on to another book in a moment, but interestingly, I really used the time during the COVID lockdown to follow my dream of having time enough to do some studying. And over the, I suppose, the 2 years that was happening, I actually took 3 courses that I've been wanting to do for a long time, but never had the time. And the first one was awareness of mental health problems. And it just took my journey just that step further from, you know, the mental health first aid training. It's sort of like a foundation course. So if you were thinking of, you know, for people who were going to become a mental health nurse, for example, that might be a foundation course that they would go on. It doesn't qualify you to be a nurse, but it's just a really good, gives you really good insight into mental health problems. The next one was understanding nutrition and health. I mean, that's one of the other important aspects of well-being. You know, we are what we eat. So again, it'd been a long time ambition of mine to sort of look more into that nutritional area. And then did a qualification on equality and diversity, which sort of took me back to my Deloitte days, the role I had there. But, you know, I was sort of catapulted into the job there and didn't really have much of a background. So I'd wanted to, for some time, learn a little bit more about that, which, again, as coaches, I think is a really important space. And then, you know, I have been a mindfulness practitioner for many years. I guess that's where my meditation journey went, and, you know, came to realize the value that mindfulness could give relief to people who had periods of depression. And I'm sure, you know, people have heard what Ruby Wax and other, you know, people in all different walks of life have had to say over recent years with regard to mindfulness and their own personal journey. So the next step for me was to become a trainer in mindfulness as well. So those are some of the sort of formal courses I've been on. But I do have a special interest in emotional health and emotional resilience. And to explain why is often our emotion is one of the first indicators that we're sort of moving from, you know, one area of, you know, perhaps good mental health to one that is not so good, you know, and it could be mood changes, it could be losing control of our emotions. So this whole area of understanding, it's like I think it's it should be part of a coach's toolkit. We should understand our own emotions, and then we can understand others, and we can pass that knowledge on. And this journey for me started when I read a book by a lady called Geeta Bhawani on emotional resilience, and my goodness me, it just set me off on a totally different level of awareness about what emotions actually are and how I could look after them. And there's a great framework in there which I think is both a preventative and a remedial framework as well, so that's a great book to read. So that's my starter for 10.
Well, there's a lot of starters there, and you've given our listeners some fantastic resources. And the thing that I love about this space is that there's some great charities and organisations that give it for free.
Absolutely.
So if you've got an interest, please go and explore. As I say, they'll all be in the show notes. The other book that I find useful just to relate to on an individual basis, but also I will send notes to my coachee if they're going through an emotional space and can't quite work out what that emotion is or means, is The Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Brené, yes.
So again, that's another great book. It's always on my bookshelf, and if I feel something, and I'll just try and work out what that emotion is. And you know, what I find with my own emotions is once I understand them and I can sort of read about it, and it starts to make it, if you like, logical, it's easy to make sense of it and then to manage it. So that's on a personal level.
Yep.
What I'd like to also talk into, Val, if I may, and I think this is a really important point to make, is that we've spoken very much from us as coaches and helping and facilitating the coachee in their own journey. But I think what you've reinforced here with your own development is that as coaches, we need to be in a really good place and our best place. So our own personal well-being as a coach is so important so that we can show up and provide that service to the client as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we are, you know, we are responsible as coaches and as supervisors to keep ourselves well, and also to recognise if we are, you know, when we're not well enough to coach, then we shouldn't be coaching. So I think this is, you know, this is our responsibility again we have as a human being. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think some people, and I'm sure we can all think of somebody in this vein, just almost live their lives on self-destruct. You know, and it's a sad thing to say, but that's it. And it's not nothing, you know, I'm not talking major drug taking or anything like that. I'm just thinking around, you know, just not looking after themselves, you know, not eating the right food. I mean, I think diet is very personal to the individual. It's certainly something I learned on the nutrition courses, that, you know, there is no such thing as a standard perfect diet. It has to be customized to the individual about what you know, what our needs are at any point in our life, you know, what conditions we might have. But yeah, I mean, just making sure we are eating the right things, we are, you know, taking exercise, whatever that means to us. You know, I don't go to the gym. I hate going to the gym, but I walk loads, you know, at least an hour a day. And just, you know, socially that we're interacting, we've got that sense of community. You know, I feel absolutely blessed and lucky to be where I am in my life right now and have the things I do around me. And I know not everybody is in that same space, but, you know, there are always small steps that we can take to ensure that we are looking after ourselves. You know, and I think particularly when we are a coach or a supervisor, we have a responsibility to do that.
Absolutely. And if I can link the two together, I think as coaches is important as part of our well-being to go to a supervisor and be able to offload and to make sure that we're keeping ourselves in good shape, not only with our coaching practice, but as you say, as a human being.
Definitely. Yeah. And one of the areas of supervision that I think sometimes maybe gets lost a little bit is the restorative space. Yes, we're there to learn, we're there to develop, we're there to share what's going on with our work, but we are there to restore ourselves, you know, because we're going on journeys with our clients, you know, and sometimes it can be a rocky journey. So we need to be able to open up in supervision and not to sort of, you know, hold things back. You know, if you've had a difficult experience or something's really knocked you, or something's not quite aligned in your life, you know, talk to your supervisor.
So, Val, thank you. Some real great learning points and from your experience, which I knew we'd get with the great stuff that you've done in this space. And we've given, I hope, to our listeners some good understanding, not just about your own experience, but where they can go and learn and develop their own capabilities in this space. So thank you for that. And as I say, those will be in the show notes. But one of the questions that I like to ask all my guests before we close down the session is around our purpose as Coaching Focus, which is coaching for a better tomorrow. So from your perspective, Val, what does coaching for a better tomorrow mean to you?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think as coaches, we do have these, really important skills that, are sort of foundations for supporting individuals in the workplace, being able to build these trusting relationships. And I think coaches have a role to play in creating and holding a space where individuals and the organisations they work for can choose to be more open and, no longer fear the stigma of mental illness, what we've been talking about today. And I think with this transparency comes permission to learn, provide relevant support, and create those compassionate working cultures that we talk about so often, but, are they really there? So maybe that is a little bit about the culture that we can work towards. I do think, we've been through some really difficult times, and I think people are that maybe weren't anxious before, have developed anxiety and are currently going through, concerns about job security, inflation, uncertainty of the economy, environmental crises, technology they don't understand, and still, that lingering aftermath of COVID-19. I mean, the list just goes on, and those things aren't going to go away. So how can we as coaches, help with building a future that feels perhaps a bit more safer for individuals? I'm going to just go back to one of the recordings, the webinars you did with George about, you were talking about different generations, Trayton. And I think, people from Gen Z and younger millennials are more open to discussing their mental health and almost expect it, actually. But interesting, they're also more likely to experience anxiety, probably as a result of what, having lived through the COVID pandemic and the sort of impact on them in particular. So I think it's, we need to influence organisations. We need to influence line managers. There's a big gap with line managers being able to support mental health in the workplace. There's a great article actually in the Harvard Business Review. It's the September-October issue, so it's very recent, and it calls Helping an Employee in Distress. And it's an amazing article. And for those of you who are very business minded and want to focus on, sort of the needs of the business, this is an article to read if you want to know more about how mental health and businesses should be, what they should be doing. So I think there's a big gap that we as coaches can help when we are coaching line managers, perhaps to be better at the people side of what they're doing.
If I may add to that as well, Val, I think it's not just about helping them to think about it, but it's also helping them to implement it and change
Definitely.
to a more compassionate workplace, because you're absolutely right. The world has changed. The world of work has never been more challenging. And I'm certainly noticing all of these things we've spoken about today come into the room more often than it used to before COVID.
Yes.
And we have a role to play as coaches, and obviously in supporting our clients, but also to create a better tomorrow by raising awareness to organisations that these are things that are going to get in the way, are getting in the way, and aren't going to go away. So they need to be doing something to enable us not only to create a compassionate workplace, but a workplace that is sustainable for human beings to operate and perform in.
Yeah. I mean, it's that being human movement, it's on a journey, we certainly haven't got to the end of it, if we ever will, but And you're right. If you look back over the last, 15 years, 10 years, a lot has changed, a lot has opened up, but there's still more to do. As I say, I just don't think we should underestimate the influence that we have as coaches to encourage individuals and organisations to do more.
Well, thank you. I knew this would be a pleasure. I feel like we could talk much longer. We will need to certainly get another podcast together. But thank you for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and your thoughts on how we can create a better tomorrow.
Thank you, Trayton. I've really enjoyed it.